From the outside, everything looked like a fairy tale that many people would envy. But Antonio's murder will soon open a Pandora box full of lies, manipulation, and lust. Let's travel all the way to Spain, where we uncover the story of a young woman known as the Black Widow.
Despite having more than 3 lovers, María Moreno, or as the locals call her, the Black Widow of Spain, did one of the most horrendous things possible, destroying her picture-perfect family by killing her husband. This story takes us to Patraix, a town in Valencia, Spain. Here, a violent crime takes place that definitely shook the entire town. At the heart of this crime story is a couple, Antonio Navarro and his wife, María Jesus Moreno. What happens to María after the vicious murder of her husband? Join us as we analyze this story of lust, manipulation, and lies. They both had one thing in common. They were born and spent most of their lives in Novelda, a city in the Valencian region of Spain. The city is around 25 kilometers west of Alicante. Antonio was born in 1981 and studied engineering at the University of Alicante. To those who knew him, Antonio was a well-educated and jovial family man. Born in 1990, María was the 4th of 5 children and had a pretty stable and normal upbringing. Notably, she grew up in a very religious home, which is why her parents named her María Jesus. For some reason, even as a little girl, María disliked this name and was much happier anytime she was called Maje. She was generally caring and was also very artistic as a child, but as the years went by, María developed a flirtatious personality. After graduating high school, she left her hometown to go study nursing in Barcelona. She immediately got swept up into the life of the metropolitan city. She had her freedom, so she made sure to have new experiences while discovering herself and evolving into the woman she wanted to be. She made a lot of new friends and got addicted to the nightlife, so much so that she was convinced that she could never settle for a life in her hometown again. During one professional internship, María met her future husband, Antonio Navarro. Technically, she had seen him around a couple of times before this meeting because he was a friend to one of her brothers with whom he had gone to college with. The two officially started dating sometime in 2011. María was notably Antonio's first serious girlfriend. There was a 9-year gap in their ages, but still they had the picture-perfect relationship. First, they moved in together in an apartment in Patraix. María was able to get a nursing job in a hospital, while Antonio worked for a large construction company. These were early days, and it was beautiful for both of them. By the 3rd of September 2016, Antonio and María officially got married in a beautiful ceremony. Together, they made for a picture-perfect couple. Anyone looking on from the outside would have agreed that they were both perfectly suited for each other. However, that sentiment couldn't have been any farther from the truth. You see, just before the wedding, María had tried to cool things off and end their relationship, but for some reason she decided to not only stay with Antonio, but also to get married to him. Even before the wedding, María had already been having repeated affairs inside the relationship. She simply wanted something that Antonio could not be bothered to give her, and that was an outgoing and party lifestyle. With hindsight, you will see that María was not in any way ready to settle down in a monogamous relationship, let alone a marriage. María was very close to one of her colleagues at the private hospital where she worked. His name is Salvador Rodrigo. Salvador was 20 years older than María, and he was already married and had a daughter of his own, who was notably just a few years younger than María. We could not say for sure what brought these two together, but at some point it evolved into an extramarital affair. One striking thing about this affair is that Salvador was probably unaware that María did not belong to him alone. While María had other lovers, Salvador was presumably devoted to her. All through the first year of their marriage, María remained unfaithful to Antonio. They argued all the time, and at some point María claimed that Antonio was getting abusive towards her. She made it seem like he was about to send her out of their home. Somehow, they both stayed together against all the odds. With their first wedding anniversary coming up, so also was a disaster. On the 16th of August 2017, Antonio set out for work at around 7:30 in the morning. María, on the other hand, was spending the day with her brother. 8 hours later, some motorcyclists who went into the parking garage at the building in Calamantra discovered a lifeless man lying face down in a pool of blood next to his car. That man was Antonio. As expected, an immediate autopsy was carried out, and the report established that Antonio had been a victim of a vicious attack where he was stabbed 6 times in the heart and lungs. There was no chance that he could survive this attack, as he died instantly. 3 days later, Antonio's family laid him to rest at the church of San Pedro Apostle. It was a beautiful ceremony, and at some point during the service, Antonio's widow, María, read a very emotional letter to him. In the letter, she expressed her undying love and gratitude towards him. Now, what really happened to Antonio? The police had briefly considered that it was a random crime. Maybe Antonio had just been at the wrong place at the wrong time, where he became the victim of a robbery gone wrong. It is not uncommon to hear that a robbery in progress eventually escalated into something much more violent, but soon this theory theory was ruled out because all of his belongings were still on him when he was found dead. As such, the police had to shift their focus of the investigation. Who could have wanted Antonio dead? His wife was questioned, so were his brothers and parents. But everyone told the police the same thing: how unfathomable it was that someone could possibly want to hurt Antonio specifically. He was introverted, but as kind and welcoming as they came. The police knew very well they had their work cut out for them. They pushed through the investigation, and everything eventually pointed to one possible culprit, someone very close to Antonio himself. First of all, Maria's alibi. At the time her husband was killed, she claimed to be with her brother. This checked out fine. However, she had texted Antonio the night before the murder and told him there had been a schedule change. She lied that she needed to work, but the police would now discover that she actually was not on duty like she had claimed. Even more disturbing is the fact that this lie was to cover up the fact that she was meeting up with one of her lovers, Thomas. Thomas is a physiotherapist, and his fling with Maria started 6 months before Maria married Antonio. It turned out that Thomas and Antonio had problems just before their marriage. Thomas had been trying to get Maria to choose him, and on one occasion, Antonio found his texts to Maria. But Antonio loved Maria so much that he chose to move past it and even proposed to her. Maybe he thought a ring would change Maria's wandering eye. We may never know, but that was the beginning of the end for Antonio. As for Maria's crimes catching up to her, finding a discrepancy in her alibi was just the beginning. The police also discovered that Maria had 2 phones. Because of this, they obtained the permission to wiretap her devices. Yes, the 26-year-old and recently widowed Maria was now top on the list of police suspects. The wiretap proved to be a good call, as it revealed that Maria was not just having an affair with 46-year-old Salvador, but also with at least 3 other men: Thomas, Sergio, and Jose. The investigation also led to the discovery that Antonio had more than one valuable life insurance policy. These police ensured that Maria would be well taken care of in the unfortunate event of his death. The police now had a possible motive, and it was really all they needed to investigate the crime further. Meanwhile, after Antonio's death, Maria immediately stopped seeing Salvador, but it seems like this was just a precautionary measure as the two of them rekindled things weeks later. The police made sure not to lose sight of Maria. She was under constant surveillance until January 2018 when she made a slip-up. In cahoots with the police, Antonio's brother informed Maria that the police were about to close in on a suspect, and they were confident that the unnamed person was the key to solving the murder investigation. The plan was to get a reaction from Maria, and it worked like a charm. As suspected, Maria grew anxious and began to make irrational moves, like calling Salvador immediately after the conversation and warning him that the police may be onto him. She also met up with Salvador in a restaurant in the Latin America shopping center. The police partially recorded this meeting, and as a result, they learned the intricate details of Antonio's murder. As Maria and Salvador discussed, there was no denying it now. Maria and Salvador both had a hand in Antonio's death. Following this meeting, they were both arrested on the 12th of January 2018. Now in police custody, Maria and Salvador were denied bail. After the arrest, Salvador confessed his actions in both his police statement and later in court. However, while confessing to the murder of Antonio, he attempted to exonerate Maria. He said he had a great friendship with her and insisted that a friendship was all it ever was. He denied any romantic involvement with her, but said he felt extremely protective towards her. According to him, Maria had been telling him that her husband was abusive and that her living situation was becoming intolerable with every passing day. This was something that Maria apparently told everyone who cared to listen, because Thomas also testified that he had believed Maria when she told him all the horrible stories of how Antonio treated her. Salvador also admitted that Maria had only given him a key to the parking garage so that it would be easy for him to park there when visiting the area. So that particular day when he made up his mind to end Maria's horrible situation, he took the key, used it to enter the garage, and patiently waited for Antonio. On the other hand, Maria had quite a believable story as well. She claimed that she had wanted a divorce from her husband. Antonio had threatened to do away with her, so she had no other choice than to do what she did. However, she admitted to the police that she had only wanted Salvador to scare Antonio. According to her, her participation in the crime was unintentional. She made the plans with Salvador, but he was supposed to simply scare Antonio into agreeing to the divorce with her terms, but at the time did not believe that he was capable of killing him in cold blood. She also admitted that Salvador had only informed her that he had killed her husband days after the crime, and that when he did, she was too scared to report him to the police. However, this was just the first story. Maria's story would change eventually, and she would begin to claim that she did not have any participation in either the planning or execution of the murder. Now, she made it seem like Salvador was simply obsessed with her and doing what he felt would make her life easier without her consent. 5 days after the arrest, Salvador led the police to the murder weapon. It was a knife which he had bought a month before the murder in a hardware store about 200 miles from the crime scene. He disposed of this knife in a septic tank on his farm and then buried it under the concrete gravel and sand. It took the specialist team over 3 hours to dig out the murder weapon. While all this was happening, Maria and Salvador were both awaiting trial. During this time, Maria had reportedly sent messages across to Salvador. They were being held in separate units within the same prison, so it was easy for her to make this final attempt to get Salvador to lie that he had completed the whole plan without her knowledge. Initially, Salvador went along with the plan, maybe because if she wasn't convicted, she could still collect the life insurance money and he may profit off this in some way. Or it could also be the fact that he was helplessly in love with her, so he did not mind doing anything just to please her. All it took was a couple of love letters professing how much she supposedly missed him and how much she hated the situation that was keeping them apart, and Salvador was ready to do anything she commanded. The fact that she was able to get these letters across in the first place just proves how much of a user Maria really is. Gaining the favor of fellow inmates so quickly is not something just anybody can do, but she did it because she knew she needed them to convey the messages. Whatever the case may be, Maria almost got away with everything. It took Salvador's daughter visiting him in prison one day to change his mind. It was during this visit that she begged her father to tell the truth so that justice could be served. Because of this, Salvador then provided the police with accurate details of what really happened in the parking garage that day. According to Salvador, Maria had told Antonio to park his car at the parking garage the evening before the murder. This was something Antonio never really did. Believing that Antonio would do as she suggested, Maria then gave Salvador the keys to the garage. The exact details of Antonio's car, as well as reliable information about Antonio's morning routine. Salvador confirmed that killing Antonio on the 12th of August 2017 had already been planned since the 3rd of August. Several calls and texts were exchanged between Maria and Salvador during that period, and they worked together on his story. They took their time to plan everything, carefully analyzing their options. It was both their decision to kill Antonio in a silent manner that would not attract a lot of attention. This was why a knife was the weapon of choice for this crime. Salvador took it upon himself to purchase the knife himself. Salvador got to the garage on his motorbike. He had on him a backpack containing the knife, some gloves, and a towel, and arrived around 7:30 that morning. In the meantime, he hid himself next to Antonio's car and waited for him to arrive. He watched Antonio enter the parking garage about 10 minutes later, and as Antonio was about to enter his car, Salvador approached him from behind. Immediately, he viciously stabbed Antonio 6 times in quick succession. In order to not get caught, Salvador dashed out of there. After leaving the garage, he quickly changed his clothes and disposed of the murder weapon and the blood-stained gloves, which he had been wearing when he killed Antonio. After all that, he first updated his WhatsApp profile with a coded message that only Maria would catch. This was his way of informing her that the deed was done. However, the investigations would uncover a devastating twist for Salvador. You see, while he was busy going about killing Antonio on Maria's orders, she was busy exchanging messages with her new lover, Jose. In fact, Maria would later admit that she never actually liked Salvador. She knew the type of person he was and how susceptible he would be, which was the only reason why she seduced him. Salvador meant nothing to her. Maria only used him to do her bidding. Later that day, the two met up at Maria's sister's house. The sister was out of town, so this seemed to be the best place for them to meet. Here, Salvador gave her the exact details of what he had done. To avoid raising any suspicions, they both decided not to contact each other for a few weeks. Lastly, he revealed that Maria's focus immediately after Antonio died was accessing the life insurance benefits he had left behind. Antonio's life insurance policy guaranteed Maria a widow's pension of €1,100 per month, as well as a premium of €47,000 since he was killed violently. Some of her friends also corroborated this story, as Maria had not been quiet about trying to get the money and also contacted the insurance provider multiple times to that effect. She persistently asked the administrative services when they would declare Antonio's death as the result of a violent accident. She did this because this was the only way to ensure that the maximum payout would get to her. As you can imagine, all of this would later serve as evidence in court that she was motivated by money. Eventually, the Black Widow Maria and her lover Salvador had to show up for their trial. As expected, the two of them were found guilty on all counts on the 14th of October 2020. In addition to their sentences, they were ordered to pay an amount of €250,000 to Antonio's parents and brothers. For being the person who had planned the whole crime, Maria received a sentence of 22 years in prison. On the other hand, Antonio, who had dealt the fatal stabs, received a sentence of 17 years in prison. This is the story of the infamous Black Widow of Spain, a woman who was capable of deceiving everyone she interacted with. She may never be able to harm anyone again, but unfortunately, it came at the cost of a man's life.